You think you know what freedom means. Most people picture a bird breaking out of a cage, a prisoner walking through opened gates, someone finally doing what they want without anyone stopping them. But there was a French philosopher sitting in a German prison camp in 1940 who understood something nobody else did. Freedom isn't about what you can do, it's about what you can't escape. His name was Jean-Paul Sartre. Born June 21st, 1905 in Paris. And the way he saw freedom was so radical, so uncomfortable, so brutally honest that when he died in April 1980, 50,000 people flooded the streets of Paris. 30,000 lined the boulevards. 20,000 packed Montparnasse Cemetery. They weren't mourning just a man. They were mourning the weight of what he taught them. That you are condemned to be free. That there's no way out. That every single second you exist, you're choosing, even when you think you're not. Because of his bad eyesight and balance problems from exotropia, they don't send him to the front. They make him a meteorologist. He sends up weather balloons in Alsace and watches them through field glasses. He writes to his partner, Simone de Beauvoir, that it's extremely peaceful work. He says he can't think of any branch of service quieter except maybe pigeon breeders. While other soldiers fight and die, Sartre sits there watching balloons drift and writing philosophy. 10, 11 hours a day. He's working on what will become Being and Nothingness. June 1940. The Germans break through. France falls in weeks. Sartre's unit retreats. They capture him in Padoue. He becomes prisoner number 31944. First Nancy, then Stalag, 12D in Trier, Germany. 9 months behind barbed wire. Most people would break, Sartre wrote. He kept writing Being and Nothingness. He read Martin Heidegger's Being and Time for the first time. A German soldier gave him a copy. He wrote his first play, Bariona, a Christmas drama that was actually a disguised call to resistance. His eyes got worse from constant reading and writing, sometimes one-eyed, sometimes both eyes so sore he tried writing with them closed, handwriting wandering across pages. But his eyes gave him his way out, April 1941. He claimed he needed treatment from an ophthalmologist. They gave him a medical pass to leave camp. He walked out the gates, showed the pass, never came back. It wasn't swashbuckling, it was simple, it worked. He returned to occupied Paris, got his teaching job back at Lycée Pasteur. Simone de Beauvoir described his encounter with phenomenology years earlier as making him turn pale with emotion. Now he was merging those ideas with the reality of war, freedom, authenticity, responsibility, anguish. The word in French is angoisse. He kept writing through occupation. The Germans were everywhere, Feldgrau uniforms, pale, dull green that became normal. Sartre called them les autres, the others. That phrase would become his most famous line. L'enfer, c'est les autres. Hell is other people. It was partly a dig at German occupiers. 1943. Being and Nothingness gets published. 628 pages of dense phenomenological ontology, the book that would define existentialism. October 29th, 1945. 7 months after Paris was liberated. Club Maintenance, a lecture hall packed beyond capacity. People fainted from heat and poor ventilation. Police had to manage the crowd. Thousands showed up. The lecture was called Existentialism as a Humanism. Sartre was responding to attacks. Marxists called his philosophy bourgeois individualism. Catholics said he denied human dignity. He stood there and gave them his answer. Existence precedes essence. You are not what you are. You are what you're not. We are condemned to be free. That lecture made him an international celebrity overnight. The text was published in 1946 and sold hundreds of thousands of copies. It became the Bible of existentialism, even though Sartre himself later regretted publishing it and rejected parts of it. But the core idea stayed, the one that changed everything. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, last updated March 26th, 2022, which remains the most authoritative academic source on Sartre's philosophical development, and the International Journal of European Studies, Volume 7, Number 1, published July 11th, 2023 by Elijah Ackenbode, which provides critical analysis of Sartre's existential freedom concept, specifically addressing the tensions between absolute freedom and moral responsibility that define his work. Now back to the information. God did the same with humans, traditional thinking said. God conceived you, gave you a nature, a purpose, then brought you into existence. Sartre was an atheist, hardcore atheist, so he said, fine, no God. That means no one designed you, you just are. You exist first. Then you make your essence through choices. That's existence precedes essence. But here's where it gets brutal. Most people hear that and think, great, I'm free to be whatever I want. Wrong. You're free whether you want to be or not. You can't stop being free. You are condemned to freedom. Sartre used that exact phrase, condemned. like a prison sentence. Because with freedom comes something nobody wants: total responsibility. They just are. They have no consciousness, no freedom, no possibility of being anything else. The rock sits there, complete, full, no questions. Being for itself is consciousness. Humans, we are not complete, we are not full. Sartre says we are nothingness, we are a lack. We exist as a gap in being. We are defined by negation, by what we are not. This sounds abstract until you see what it means. Right now, you're not who you were 5 years ago. You are already not what you are. You're also not yet who you'll be tomorrow. You're not your past because you can transcend it through choices. You're not your future because it hasn't happened. You're this strange in-between thing that exists through negation, through nothingness. Sartre argues that Pierre's absence pervades the whole café. The café is cast in the metaphorical shade of Pierre not being there. This isn't just Sartre thinking negative thoughts. It's an ontological reality. Nothingness enters the world through human consciousness. We bring negation into existence. We ask questions. Who's there? Nobody. What's happening? Nothing. Every question opens up the possibility of a negative answer. That's how nothingness gets into being. Through us. Through consciousness. And that nothingness is what makes us free. Because we are not our facticity. Facticity is everything you didn't choose. Your birth date, your birthplace, your body, your past, your historical situation. The facts of your existence. These are real. They constrain you, but they don't determine you, because you are not identical to them. You exist as consciousness that transcends them. He says, even if you're labeled, categorized, oppressed, you still have freedom. Not freedom to change the facts, freedom to choose what the facts mean. A Jewish person in Nazi-occupied France can't choose not to be targeted. That's facticity. But they can choose how to respond, resist, flee, fight, collaborate. Each choice creates meaning. Sartre says even if someone categorizes you as black, you have choice about what you make of that category. If you do nothing, you act in bad faith. You deny yourself. You choose to be what others say you are without making your own meaning from it. This gets Sartre in trouble with critics. They say he's blaming victims, telling oppressed people they chose their oppression. But that's not it. He's saying oppression is real. Facticity is real. The constraints are real. But within constraints, consciousness still chooses. Has to choose. Can't not choose. Bad faith. Mauvaise foi. This is Sartre's term for self-deception, for lying to yourself about your freedom. His most famous example is the cafe waiter. Being and nothingness describes him in detail. The waiter's movement is quick and forward. A little too precise, a little too rapid. He comes toward customers with a step a little too quick. He bends forward a little too eagerly. His voice and eyes express interest a little too solicitous for the order. He returns trying to imitate the inflexible stiffness of an automaton while carrying his tray like a tightrope walker. All his behavior seems like a game. He's playing at being a waiter. He's trying to become a waiter the way a rock is a rock. Completely, totally. No gap, no consciousness, no freedom. But he can't, because he's not a rock. He's a human being, a for itself. He has consciousness. He's not identical to his role as waiter. Sartre writes, I am in a sense a cafe waiter, otherwise, could I not just as well call myself a diplomat or reporter? But if I am one, this cannot be in the mode of being in itself. I am a waiter in the mode of being what I am not. Essentially. But that's a lie. He is free. He could quit, walk out, do something else. He knows this, but he acts as if he doesn't. That's bad faith. You see it everywhere. The person who says, I have no choice, I must support my family, as if that's not a choice. The person who says, I'm just following orders, as if that removes responsibility. The person who says that's just who I am, I can't change, as if they're an object with fixed properties, instead of a conscious being who could choose differently. Sartre says, bad faith is unavoidable. We all do it. We have to. Because fully embracing freedom is exhausting, terrifying. It means recognizing that every second you're choosing. Even choosing not to choose is a choice. Even staying where you are is a choice. Even doing what you've always done is a choice. There's no escape from choosing. That's why we're condemned. Critics attacked the waiter example. They said Sartre sits in cafes all day smoking and writing and uses the people serving him as examples of inauthenticity. It's elitist. It's insulting. It misses the point. But Sartre wasn't really talking about waiters. He was talking about everyone, every social role, every job, every identity. Every time you say this is just who I am, you're in bad faith, because you are not who you are. You are what you are not. You are always becoming, always transcending, always free. The waiter example was just the most obvious case. Someone performing a role a little too perfectly, making the lie visible, Authenticity means acknowledging that you are not determined, not by your past, not by your situation, not by others' expectations. You're making yourself through choices, every moment. Authenticity means anguish, angoisse, the emotional experience of recognizing your freedom and responsibility. You realize you're responsible not just for yourself, but for the image of humanity you create through your choices. When you choose for everyone. You say, this is what a human being does. This is what's valuable. That's heavy. That's why most people live in bad faith. It's easier, more comfortable, less anguishing. But if he leaves, his mother will despair. If he stays, he abandons the fight against fascism. What should he do? Sartre says there's no answer, no rule, no God to tell you, no universal morality that gives you the right choice. You must choose. And in choosing, you create the meaning. You say this is what matters more, fighting fascism or caring for your mother. Both are valid. Neither is predetermined as correct. Your choice makes it so. That's freedom. That's responsibility. That's anguish. The young man probably wanted Sartre to tell him what to do, to give him an answer, to remove the burden. Sartre refused, because that would be encouraging bad faith, pretending someone else can choose for you. They can't. You must choose, always. He says, you are responsible for everything in your life, except the fact that you have responsibility. You are free, but you're not free to stop being free. You're condemned to it. If you're in a bad situation, you're responsible, not because you caused it, but because you're choosing how to respond. Even accepting it is a choice. Critics say this is cruel. A person in poverty didn't choose poverty. A person facing discrimination didn't choose to be discriminated against. True, but Sartre says they still choose whether to fight it, accept it, internalize it, transcend it. The facticity is given, the meaning is chosen, always. This doesn't mean all choices are equal. Some situations make authentic choice harder. Oppression is real, violence is real, but consciousness remains free within constraints. That's the core of Sartre's view. Let's look at facticity more carefully. Sartre lists 5 structures where freedom and facticity interpenetrate. 1. Your place. You're born somewhere. You exist in a location. You didn't choose it, but you choose what to make of it. 2. Your past. Everything you've done is facticity. It's fixed, done, but you're not identical to it. You can transcend it, reinterpret it, choose a different future. 3. Your environment. The physical and social world around you. You can't change all of it, but you choose how to engage with it. 4. Your fellow humans, other people, their judgments, their expectations, their presence. You can't control them, but you choose how to respond to their gaze, their demands, their existence. 5. Your death, the ultimate facticity. You will die. You can't choose when in most cases, but you can choose how to live knowing death is coming. How to make meaning despite or because of mortality. It awaits the meaning consciousness gives it through projects. This is what Sartre calls the situation. The contingency of freedom within the fullness of being. It's a joint product. The contingency of the in itself and freedom. You can't fully separate what comes from freedom and what comes from brute existence. They're mixed. Always. But freedom is still there. You still choose. Must choose, can't not choose. That lecture. Existentialism is a humanism. The title itself was controversial. Critics had called Sartre's work anti-humanist, depressing, nihilistic, ugly. Sartre stood there and said, no, existentialism is a humanism because it puts human freedom at the center. It makes humans responsible for meaning. It refuses to let us hide behind God, fate, nature, society, anything else. We make ourselves. That's humanist, even if it's difficult. The lecture hall was packed. Thousands couldn't get in. Those inside fainted from heat. Police-controlled crowds. This was October 29th, 1945. 1 week after France held elections, communists, socialists, Christian Democrats forming a coalition government. France was rebuilding, redefining itself. And here was Sartre saying, you're condemned to be free. Choose who you'll be. Don't hide, don't deceive yourself. Take responsibility. It was exactly what post-war France needed to hear, and exactly what made people uncomfortable. Kept speaking, kept living according to his principles. In 1960, he published Critique of Dialectical Reason, an attempt to marry existentialism with Marxism, to show how individual freedom operates within historical and social structures. It was 800 pages, dense, difficult. He wrote it in a frenzy in 1958, consuming amphetamines, almost killing himself. But he got it done, because that's what he chose. He chose to write, to think, to push ideas to their limits. But they're free to choose what their imprisonment means. Resistance, despair, hope, suicide, acceptance. Each is a choice. Each creates meaning. Sartre himself experienced this. 9 months in Stalag 12. He was confined, trapped, but he wrote, read, thought, organized prisoners, wrote a play that called for resistance. He chose to make his imprisonment meaningful. That was freedom. Not freedom from the prison, freedom within it. This is why Sartre says, we are condemned to freedom of an ontological sort. It's not about what you can or can't do physically. It's about what you can or can't avoid in terms of consciousness and choice. You can avoid specific actions. You can't avoid choosing. Even refusing to choose is choosing. Even letting others decide for you is choosing to let them decide. Even living on autopilot, following routines, not thinking, is choosing that mode of existence. There's no way out. Consciousness brings nothingness into the world. Nothingness brings freedom. Freedom brings responsibility. Responsibility brings anguish. You can live in bad faith to escape the anguish, but that's still a choice. And somewhere in you, you know it. That knowledge is what makes bad faith bad. You're lying to yourself. But you know you're lying. That's the structure of consciousness. It's self-aware. It can't fully deceive itself. Even in bad faith, you remain free. Not because people are terrible in themselves, but because their look transforms me from subject to object, from for itself to in itself. I lose my sense of freedom. I become what they see. Sartre gives an example. You're alone in a room, looking through a keyhole, totally absorbed, free, transcendent. Suddenly you hear footsteps. Someone sees you. Immediately you become ashamed. Why? Because you experience yourself as they see you, a voyeur. Someone caught spying. Your free consciousness collapses into an identity, an essence, what they see. This is objectification. It's mutual. You do it to others, they do it to you. Every interaction involves this struggle. You try to maintain your subjectivity. They try to maintain theirs. Someone has to become object. That's why relationships are hard, why love is complicated, why recognition is so difficult. Not just for practical reasons, for ontological ones. We can't fully know ourselves alone. We need the other's perspective. We need to be recognized. But recognition means objectification. It means losing the pure freedom of solitary consciousness. So we're caught. We need others, but they threaten us. We want recognition, but it makes us objects. There's no resolution, only ongoing tension. This is why Sartre wrote No Exit. The play where 3 people are trapped in a room together, forever. Hell, they can't escape each other's gaze, can't stop objectifying each other, can't maintain their freedom. Hell is other people because others make you see yourself as an object, make you confront your being for others. Your essence is seen from outside, which you can never fully control or escape. If you value documented philosophy and intellectual history like this, make sure you're subscribed. Drop a comment about which aspect of Sartre's thought surprised you most. This brings us to responsibility. You're saying this is what a human should do. This is valuable. You can't escape that weight. Even choosing selfishly is a choice. It's saying selfishness is justified, is human. You're responsible for that claim. Responsible to yourself, to others, to the image of humanity you create. This is anguish. Recognizing that your choices matter, not just for you, for everyone, because you're defining what it means to be human through your actions. Critics still complain. They say Sartre's philosophy can't distinguish right from wrong. If all choices are free, how can any be wrong? Sartre would say, you're missing the point. It's not that all choices are equal. It's that no choice is predetermined as right. You must decide, and you're responsible for the decision. You must live with it. That's morality, not following rules, but taking ownership of your choices and their consequences. Sartre was political, intensely political. He opposed French colonialism in Algeria, opposed American intervention in Vietnam, supported Marxism, though never joined the Communist Party, supported the French resistance during occupation, though his role was limited. After the war, he became increasingly visible, vocal, controversial. He visited Cuba, met Castro and Che Guevara, visited the USSR, said positive things about Stalin that he later regretted, opposed the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956, exposed Soviet labor camps. He was inconsistent, contradictory sometimes, but always engaged, always choosing, always taking responsibility for his positions, even when wrong. This is authentic living in his view, not being perfect, but being engaged, taking stands, making choices, refusing to hide. Sartre was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He declined it, became the first person ever to refuse a Nobel Prize. Why? He said he always declined official honors. A writer should not allow himself to be turned into an institution. Accepting the prize would compromise his authenticity, would make him beholden to the establishment, would turn him into an object, an honored figure, a commodity. He refused. It was a choice, a public one, a radical one. Critics said he was arrogant, ungrateful, attention-seeking. Maybe, but he was also being consistent, living according to his philosophy. You are not your honors. You're not your reputation. You are your choices, moment to moment. He chose to refuse. That was authentic. That was free. That was taking responsibility for not becoming what others wanted him to be. Amphetamine abuse, years of intense work. His eyesight failed. By 1973, he was nearly blind. But he kept working, kept writing, kept doing interviews. His last major work was on Gustave Flaubert, a massive 3-volume study called The Family Idiot. Thousands of pages analyzing Flaubert's life and work through existential psychoanalysis, showing how a person makes themselves through choices within constraints. How facticity and freedom interpenetrate, how you become who you are through projects. It was unfinished. He couldn't complete the 4th volume. His body gave out. April 15th, 1980. Pulmonary edema. Sartre died in Paris. He was 74 years old. 4 days later, Saturday, April 19th, his funeral. It started at the hospital at 2 p.m. The cortege moved through the 14th arrondissement, past his haunts, the cafes. The streets he walked. 50,000 people showed up. 30,000 lined the boulevards. 20,000 filled Montparnasse Cemetery. They climbed trees, stood on headstones, scrambled to see, to pay respects. Not to a saint, not to a hero, to a philosopher, someone who told them uncomfortable truths, someone who said you are condemned to be free. You must choose. You are responsible, always. A few colleagues, some family, some students. Sartre got 50,000. Why? Because he mattered. Because his ideas touched people, not because they were comforting, because they were true, hard truth, brutal truth, but truth people recognized. When he said you are free, they felt it. When he said you are responsible, they knew it. When he said you cannot escape choosing, they understood, even when they didn't want to. Maybe especially when they didn't want to. That's why they came. That's why they mourned. An era ended. The philosopher who refused to let humans hide, who demanded authenticity, who said face your freedom, face your responsibility, face your anguish, live anyway, was consumed with grief. The crowd surged forward. Someone fell into the grave. Chaos, respect, love. 50,000 people for a man who said hell is other people, for a man who said you are nothing, for a man who said you're condemned to be free, because they understood. He wasn't saying you are worthless. He was saying you're not determined, you're not fixed, you're not done, you're always becoming, always choosing, always free. That's the burden. That's the gift. That's what it means to be human. Authenticity is accepting it. Facticity is real but doesn't determine meaning. Situation constrains but doesn't remove choice. These aren't outdated ideas. They're permanent truths about human existence. As long as humans exist, they'll be free, whether they want to be or not. As long as they're free, they'll be responsible, whether they acknowledge it or not. As long as they're responsible, they'll face anguish, whether they embrace it or hide from it in bad faith. Even their power over you requires your response, your choice. Even submission is chosen. Even passivity is active. Even doing nothing is doing something. Choosing not to resist, choosing not to fight, choosing not to change. These are choices. You made them. You're responsible. That's terrifying. That's liberating. That's what Sartre understood better than almost anyone. Sartre says suffering itself isn't a motive. The worker must apprehend their suffering as intolerable and revolution as possible before they act. The apprehension is a choice, a negation, a recognition that things could be otherwise. Without that negation, suffering just is, like a rock just is. The worker's consciousness brings nothingness into the situation, creates the gap between what is and what could be. That gap is freedom. The woman on a date who ignores sexual implications, pretends compliments are purely intellectual. She knows better, but acts as if she doesn't. That's bad faith. She's avoiding the choice, avoiding taking responsibility for her response. The homosexual who denies being a homosexual, not because they don't engage in homosexual acts, but because they refuse to be identified with those acts, refuse to let the acts define them. On one level, this is authentic. A person is not identical to their actions. But Sartre says it becomes bad faith when it's denial rather than transcendence, when it's refusing responsibility rather than maintaining freedom. But chosen nonetheless. Things could be otherwise. The hiker could push through. Has before. This time chooses not to. That's freedom. That's responsibility. The prisoner who submits. Why? Because they choose to see submission as necessary, as inevitable, as the only option. But it's not. They could resist, fight, choose death over compliance. Submission is easier, more rational perhaps, but it's chosen. The prisoner who resists, even when it's futile, is making a different choice, choosing meaning over survival, choosing freedom over life. Both are valid. Both are authentic if done with full awareness. Neither is predetermined. The choice is what matters, the recognition that you're choosing. In The Imaginary, published 1940, he writes that imagination is the whole of consciousness as it realizes its freedom. When you imagine, you posit something as not real, as absent, as elsewhere. That requires standing back from the world, negating what is, creating what isn't. That's freedom. That's nothingness, entering reality through consciousness. A dog doesn't imagine. A rock doesn't imagine. Only humans. Only consciousness. Because only consciousness can negate, can create absence, can bring nothingness into being. This is why Sartre says, for consciousness to be able to imagine, it must be able to escape from the world by its very nature. It must be able to stand back from the world by its own efforts. In a word, it must be free. The homosexual doesn't just fail to accept identity, they deny freedom by refusing to make meaning from their actions. The woman on the date doesn't just avoid sex, she denies freedom by pretending the choice isn't there. These are all forms of bad faith, all ways of lying to yourself about your freedom, all ways of trying to become in itself when you are for itself, thing when you are consciousness, fixed when you are fluid. Determined when you're free, it doesn't work, can't work. But we keep trying, because freedom is hard, responsibility is heavy, anguish is painful, bad faith offers relief, temporary, illusory, but relief nonetheless. That's why it's so common, so tempting, so human. Critique of dialectical reason asks how free individuals create historical structures that then constrain future freedom. How does a group form? Through what Sartre calls the fused group, a moment when individuals recognize shared threat and common interest. Choose to act together. That fusion is free, chosen. But it creates a structure, a group with roles and rules and expectations. That structure becomes facticity for future members. They're born into it, constrained by it, but still free within it, still able to negate it, transcend it, create something new. This is Sartre trying to show how freedom operates at every level. Individual, collective, historical. It's always there, always operative, always inescapable, even in the most constrained circumstances, even under the most oppressive systems. Consciousness brings nothingness. Nothingness brings freedom. Freedom brings choice. Choice brings responsibility. The cycle never ends, as long as consciousness exists. When you really pay attention to your experience, you notice something strange. You are not identical to your past. You're not identical to your body. You're not identical to your roles. You're not identical to what others think of you. There's always a gap, always a distance, always a sense that you could be otherwise. That's consciousness. That's freedom. That's nothingness. Sartre gave us the vocabulary to understand it, the framework to think about it, the courage to face it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's anguishing, even when we wish it weren't true. You are condemned to be free, not because someone imposed freedom on you, but because you are consciousness. And consciousness is freedom. Its very structure, its very nature. You can live in bad faith, deny it, hide from it, lie about it, but somewhere in you, you know, you're free. You're choosing. You're responsible every moment, every second, every breath. That's what Sartre understood. That's what he taught. That's what 50,000 people mourned in April 1980. Not just a man, but a truth. Uncomfortable, unavoidable, ultimate. You're condemned to be free. Every political stance defended or reconsidered. He didn't just write about freedom and responsibility. He lived it. Messily sometimes, imperfectly often, but consciously. Always consciously. Every decision was made, not drifted into. Made. Every relationship was chosen, not fallen into. Chosen. Every position was taken, not inherited. Taken. That's what authenticity looks like in practice. Not perfection, not consistency, but consciousness. Awareness that you're choosing. Ownership of the choice. Responsibility for the consequences. That's all Sartre ever asked. Not that you make the right choices, but that you make choices. And recognize them as yours. Not God's, not society's, not nature's. Yours, chosen, free, responsible, anguished, authentic, human. Existentialism is a humanism. Critique of dialectical reason. No exit. The roads to freedom. Nausea. Words. They sit on shelves. Digital files now too. Anyone can read them. Anyone can encounter his ideas. And when they do, something happens. They recognize themselves. In the for itself. In the nothingness. In the freedom. In the bad faith. In the anguish. In the responsibility. They see their own experience described. Made explicit. Made philosophical. That recognition doesn't fade. Once you see your freedom, you can't unsee it. Once you understand your choosing, you can't unknow it. Once you accept responsibility, you can't unaccept it. That's Sartre's legacy, not a comfortable philosophy. Not an easy teaching, but a true one. As true now as in 1943, as true as it will be as long as consciousness exists. You're condemned to be free. That's the message. That's the truth. That's what Jean-Paul Sartre understood about freedom that was much more genius than you imagined.